Dr. Williamson.
Yes, pardon me.
Monsieur Bergeron. Bergeron.
Oui.
Yes.
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 Motion as amended carries.
So thank you very much. I declare it adopted. I would now like to welcome our first witness, Dr. Lobsang Sangay Skiyong, President of the Central Tibetan Administration. Dr. Sangay, pardon me, you have 10 minutes, up to 10 minutes to make your opening statement. Thank you very much for appearing.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, Jeff Reagan, and Vice Chairs and the members of the committee. You know, here in Dharamsala, it's 1 a.m. So, you know, given the importance of the committee, I thought I should, you know, deprive myself of the sleep and talk about China and Tibet. I just want to say in Tibetan, Tashi Delek and Tujiche, the Kogab Sangmana Wadela, and the Pimi Digzuda, Pimi Mang Subcheche, and Pedin da Yana Davidon Tikji Shuchova Chess. I just said in Tibetan what I said in English. And, you know, it's odd that because of the COVID-19, which originated in Wuhan, now instead of meeting in person, we have to conduct such hearing through online. So the inconvenience caused to all of us, I think partly due to the Chinese government's irresponsible act by not letting us to know that the coronavirus do transmit from human to human, and several thousands were infected, but they did not inform the world, and that led us to this very precarious situation. And then I just want to say what I said in 2018, which is similar to what US government and others have been saying. The challenge posed by the Communist Party of China or the Chinese government is very serious. So either we transform China or China will transform us. So the liberal values are at stake, democracy is at stake, human rights is at stake, environmental issues is at stake. Being the second largest donor to the United Nations, China is trying to restructure United Nations by putting key personnel who support them and who compromises democratic values and human rights values. They are trying to redefine human rights. They have already passed 2 resolutions redefining human rights. And if that is to continue, then the human rights that we know, where freedom of speech and political rights are considered key, will be diluted. So, and then all over the world, what happened in Tibet in 1950s, elite co-optation of influencing politicians, influencing business people, intellectuals, media, all these things are taking place. Having traveled from, Ottawa to Norway to Sweden to Australia, I see this over and over again. Because of this elite co-optation, the Chinese government tried to get many people in your own countries, favoring or supporting the Chinese version of events, and so this is what they are trying to do. And as we see in Canada, with the issue of Michael and Michael, obviously my solidarity is with the family members of Michael and Michael, but it's a choice between moral and money. So if the Canadian government, submits to the Chinese government demand to exchange Miss Meng Wanzhou for Michael and Michael, and that will lead to other cases where more Canadians could be arrested, and then they will be used as a hostage to pressure on Canadian government to give them concessions. So I think the Canadian government has taken the right stand not to succumb to the pressure from the Chinese government. And the issue of Taiwan as a member at WHO, I think I have been in favor of Taiwan status be restored pre-2016 when they were a member at the WHO, because coronavirus is simply a health issue, and Taiwan has performed brilliantly in dealing with coronavirus, and their expertise and their experience could be invaluable in handling this coronavirus, and their role should be provided for, accommodated at WHO, but because of Chinese government pressure, they are not allowed in. And the security law of Hong Kong too, and this is what we have seen in Tibet, the unity law in Tibet, and the similar security laws were passed in Tibet, and these laws are simply to undermine democratic values, undermine freedom of speech, and political repression of the Tibetan people, environmental destruction of the Tibetan plateau, and economic marginalization of the Tibetan people. All these are taking place primarily because Chinese government has imposed, like Hong Kong, security laws and unity laws. These are used to undermine freedom of the Tibetan people. So hence, what we have been saying is that what happened to Tibet could happen to you. And from Taiwan to Hong Kong and in East Turkestan, with 1 million or so people detained, including a Canadian citizen, Uyghur Canadian Jalal, who has been detained in China. All this clearly show that what happened in Tibet 60 years ago is happening all over the world. So there are a lot of lessons you can learn from Tibet. So with this, I want to recommend that the Canadian government, especially the committee, could pass a motion and support a middle way approach as a policy, which seeks genuine autonomy for the Tibetan people within the framework of the Chinese constitution. For that to happen, there ought to be a dialogue between the envoys of the Dalai Lama and representatives of the Chinese government. This is, in fact, a win-win proposition for the Chinese government and the Tibetan people. And I hope the committee will consider supporting middle way approach. And religious freedom is vital. This year marks the 30th birthday of Panchen Lama and 25th anniversary of disappearance. We don't know where he is. He has disappeared for 25 years. And Panchen Lama's case reflects the tragedy of situation of religious leaders and religious freedom in Tibet. And Chinese government is trying to interfere in the selection of reincarnated lamas. So reincarnation is strictly a spiritual business, but the Communist Party of China is politicizing it, and they are saying they will interfere and they will select the reincarnated Lama, and the Tibetan people should follow those religious leaders. This is in clear violation of basic human rights and basic spiritual tradition. And also, I would urge the Canadian government to join alliance of democracies or like-minded countries, which supports and upholds liberal values, to be together. So work in coordination with other countries to press on Chinese government that they ought to be a responsible member of the international community, and international norms and regulations ought to be followed. If they don't do it, they will not get the respect that they want as an upcoming superpower. So Chinese government ought to respect human rights and liberal values of the Tibetan people and the Uyghurs in the Hong Kong and people in Taiwan as well. So these are the issues which are very important. And finally, Tibet is very important from environmental point of view. 10 major rivers of Asia flow from Tibet. Tibet is called the water tower of Asia. More than 1 billion people depend on water flowing from Tibet. And the climate changes all over the world, including whether the winter will be cold or warm in Ottawa, or the summer will be too hot or not, is partly dependent on jet stream, from the Tibetan plateau. So that's, is also a very important matter. So Chinese government do talk about providing leadership in, climate change, but the action and the record in Tibet is an abysmal, a very poor record. So Chinese government should be held accountable as far as environmental destruction of the Tibetan plateau is concerned. So these are the, some of the points were also raised by a Tibetan Canadian called Sangye, who walked all the way from Toronto to Ottawa and visited the parliament, asking parliamentarians to support dialogue between Chinese government and the envoys of the Dalai Lama to find a peaceful solution to the Tibet issue and the whereabouts of Panchen Lama and religious freedom. So I would like to end here because my time is up, and thank the committee members for inviting me. So given the importance, even though it's past midnight, it's past 1 a.m., I'm here to represent Tibetan people and emphasize how important Tibet issue is. With that, I want to thank the chair, the clerk, and all the members of the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sangye, and thank you for sticking to your time. I know the members are looking forward to asking you questions, and of course, you'll have opportunities to speak, and they'll be looking forward to hearing from you. So I will go first, the first speaker, and this is the 6-minute round. Mr. Jenneth.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Dr. Sangye, for being here and for staying up so late. Dharamsala is certainly a beautiful place to be. I wanted to start by expressing my support for everything you said in your opening remarks, and I appreciate your challenge to this committee to put forward a motion or initiative expressing our clear support for the middle way approach, facilitated through direct dialogue, and also standing up for religious freedom inside of Tibet. It is amazing that we have an officially atheist regime that also claims to control and know reincarnation. It would be comical if it wasn't so tragic. So I want to express my support for you on those points, and I'm hopeful that this committee will be able to adopt motions to that effect, adding our voice to yours and the voice of so many Tibetan Canadians who I know raise these issues on a regular basis. You've framed some of this discussion of Tibet as Tibet being kind of the first victim of CCP colonialism. I think that's such an important point for us to think about, that so many of the techniques of colonialism, of elite capture, of control that the CCP is trying to deploy around the world, Tibet was the first case in which we saw that happen. I wonder if you could just speak a bit more to Chinese state colonialism and also the implications that you're seeing for the Tibetan diaspora community. For instance, issues of Chinese state influence in Nepal and the implications for Tibetans in Nepal, and the intimidation and pressure that Tibetans face even in Canada, the United States, and in other Western countries as well. What are the manifestations of that for the diaspora?
Yes, the Communist Party is a declared atheist party, but they claim to have authority to recognize reincarnated lamas. So His Holiness Dalai Lama jokingly said, if they're very serious about reincarnation, then first they must find the reincarnation of Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping, these great Chinese Communist Party leaders. Then once they have developed some expertise and credibility, then only they can talk about reincarnation of Tibetan lamas, right? So I think, it's bizarre that they claim to have authority on spiritual matters. Yes, I think Tibet has been the first victim. The blueprint that they use in Tibet is being used everywhere. So, having traveled to the African continent or Latin America or Europe, anywhere, the elite co-optation is a classic case, where they co-opt elite and influence various leaders to support the Chinese version of the narrative, as well as Chinese government policies. So as far as colonization of Tibet is concerned, natural resources, gold, copper, borax, uranium, Chinese government has declared that Tibet has around 123 different kinds of minerals, billions and billions of dollars of worth, right? And all these are being exploited by Chinese companies in tandem with Chinese officials and for, purely for profit. For example, I think 70% of the lithium in China comes from Tibet. And we all use Chinese products, and which has, lithium battery, right? So why Chinese product is so cheap? Because they don't pay anything to the Tibetan farmers and nomads from where they extract all the lithium. And when the extraction is very complicated, they use a lot of chemicals. They pollute our soil, they pollute our air, water, but they extract it for free and they put it in Chinese gadgets and they sell it. And similarly, rare earth, 90% of the rare earth at one time comes from Inner Mongolia, or Outer Mongolia. But they don't pay anything to the Mongolians, but they extract it and use it in Chinese products. So obviously, colonization and exploitation of natural resources are taking place. Tibetans in Nepal are in very serious situation, because since 1990, anyone who's born and brought up in Nepal, Tibetans, they don't get even birth certificate. They don't have residency card. They don't have travel documents. So a lot of Tibetans have come to, or forced to leave Nepal and go to Canada and Europe and other places. So under the Chinese government pressure, Tibetans in Nepal, even today, are living in very, very tough conditions. So you can clearly see the Chinese government influence is not just restricted to Tibetans inside Tibet. Even Tibetans in exile, in Nepal are under tremendous pressure. So this is the situation of Tibetans in Nepal.
Mr. Geddes, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I wonder if you can also just speak to, you talked about some of the repression around natural resources and mining. We've heard suggestions at the Human Rights Committee around the issue of Uyghurs and doing something about supply chains. What suggestions would you have around ensuring that our supply chains are not polluted by abuse of human rights, or that companies aren't involved in supplying security technology that's used in the abuse of human rights?
Yeah, I think it's very important that for any kind of exploitation of natural resources, we have to find the origin of the raw materials. And often it comes from Xinjiang, it comes from Tibet. And we always say anything the Chinese company or any Canadian company, we have some Canadian companies had investment in gold mining and copper mining in Tibet as well. So we have to investigate these cases and find out that they are environmentally sustainable, culturally sensitive, and economically beneficial to the Tibetan people. And if it is not the case, then these Canadian companies or investors should be held accountable. So this is very, very important.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you very much. That's Mr. We've gone over Mr. Dennis's time by a few seconds. Mr. Virani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Madam Clerk. Dr. Lobsang Sangala Tashilek, Dering Mixel, Canada Gyanak, Sokchung La Pepa Tujiche. So for the benefit of those of you who don't speak Tibetan, I just said thank you very much for participating in the special Canada-China Committee today. It's obviously very late in Dharamsala. We're very grateful to you also for putting up with our procedural indulgences at the start of this meeting. Thank you for participating, but also thank you for your leadership, Skiyong La, because your leadership in promoting internationally the cause of Tibet and the struggle of the Tibetan people for basic human rights. As the representative of 7,000 Canadians of Tibetan descent in my riding of Parkdale High Park, one of whom you mentioned in your remarks, the fellow who walked back and forth from Toronto to Ottawa, know that your advocacy is appreciated by my constituents and by me personally. I want to raise at least a couple of issues in the time that we have, and I'll ask you to be somewhat brief in your responses. But the first relates to the Panchen Lama. It is a very important year, as you outlined, because it is the 25th anniversary of his disappearance. At the age of 6, when he disappeared, he was known as the world's youngest political prisoner and religious prisoner. He was 6 years old at the time, and he has been not seen for 25 years. When the Tibetan delegation, the official delegation, appeared in the last parliament in 2018, I felt incumbent upon me to appear at that committee and ask some pointed questions. And I asked Pema Wangdi about the whereabouts of Gedden Choki Nyima. And he said, quote, "He is living a normal life with his family and does not wish to be disturbed," end quote. And we know that there's been statements from the Chinese Foreign Ministry that stating that he has now finished his schooling, he is now working. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, if you could answer in about 60 seconds, is are you satisfied with this type of response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry? And has the Central Tibetan Administration attempted to verify the accuracy of this information? So over to you, Skiyong.
Yeah, absolutely not. Even the 5 UN human rights experts have just recently, a few days ago, raised this issue that they want to know the whereabouts of Panchen Lama. It's been now, he's 31 years old. The Chinese government to say that he is 31 years old and college graduate, has a job, and his family members, do not want to be disturbed. I think it's absolutely baseless, because from what we know, even his siblings are not allowed to meet, visit and meet him, right? Like regular siblings. Parents are not allowed. Parents and siblings are all kept apart in various parts of China. So they can meet only with the permission of the Chinese government once or twice a year. Even their family visits are not allowed, right? And if he's actually free, if he doesn't want to be disturbed, we would like to see him in Ottawa. Let him appear before the special committee on Canadian-China relationship, and let him speak his mind. Let his parents come. Let his siblings come. Right? Absolutely, we are very worried about his whereabouts, and to be disappeared for 25 years is a gross violation of human rights.
Thank you, Skiyong. So I want to just build upon that and ask you a bit about the state of basic religious, linguistic, and cultural freedoms within the PRC. So we've heard about the Uyghurs. As a Muslim Canadian, I'm appalled by what we are hearing about the Uyghurs. But I'm also troubled by their status being a bit more well known right now than some of the other violations of basic cultural and religious and linguistic freedoms, such as those that relate to your community. So the Buddhist temples, which are ostensibly open in China, not being allowed to permit a display of his picture of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a man who is an honorary citizen of our country. The fact that Larungar and Yarchengar in the Kham province in eastern Tibet, where thousands of monks and nuns received their training, were literally decimated by the PRC. The fact that in January 2016, Tashi Wangchuk, a language advocate who promotes the use and the instruction of Tibetan language, was arrested and then subsequently convicted against the pleas of many international countries, Canada included. So can you please tell us a little bit about the current state of affairs regarding linguistic, cultural, and religious freedom of Tibetans living in the People's Republic, and what that should indicate to us in terms of the policy that we develop here in Canada, along with those international allies you mentioned we need to be developing. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. According to one report, 92% of publication in Lhasa are in Chinese language, only 8% in Tibetan language. Clearly, you can see the Chinese government investing a lot to promote Chinese language as the medium of instruction, Chinese language as the main language, and undermine Tibetan language, even though constitutionally, Tibetan language ought not only to be used, but should be promoted by the Chinese government. So yes, Buddhist temples and monasteries are destroyed. You mentioned the case of Larungar and Yarchengar. You can Google Yarchengar. You can see clearly half of the infrastructure of Yarchengar is disappeared. It's flat. It just happened in the last few years as several nuns also committed suicide. Nowadays, even a monk or a nun to leave their monastery to another place, they need to seek permission. From district to district travel, they need to seek permission. Such kind of repression and the constraints are put on the Tibetan people who would like to follow their religion. Now, Tashi Wangchuk, he was simply asking for what is already guaranteed in the Chinese Constitution and Minority National Act of 1984, that Tibetan language be allowed to be used as bilingual, medium of instruction. And he was chronicled by none other than New York Times, saying he was following law of the land, but he was sentenced as a separatist and he is in prison. So even those basic rights are not allowed.
Doctor, I'm sorry to interrupt. I may have chances with other questions to go further on that. Et maintenant, c'est Monsieur Bergeron qui a 6 minutes.
6 minutes now, Mr. Bergeron. Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Mr. Sangay, for being with us today, even though it's very late where you are. I thank you for having taken that time. I'm sorry, and I apologize for the procedural delay that occurred at the beginning of our meeting. You know perhaps that this committee is very concerned about the situation that is presently occurring in Hong Kong. In the coming days, we'll be dealing more precisely with the situation in Hong Kong. You yourself drew a parallel between the situation in Hong Kong and Tibet with the 17 points agreement that was negotiated at the beginning of the 50s, the 1950s. There was a national security law since that has been passed and now is being adapted to Hong Kong. So what have you been seeing with this situation over the passage of time?
As I said, what happened to Tibet could happen to you. So, in Tibet, the one country, two system, which was later provided to Hong Kong, was already promised in 1951 through 17-point agreement. For example, Article 4 of the 17-point agreement said authority and status of the Dalai Lama will remain the same. Tibetan language will be allowed to use and monasteries can function as before. Any reform will happen only after consulting and seeking consent of the Tibetan people. All these were provided in the 17-point agreement. But from 1951 to 59, the Chinese government violated essentially all the provisions of the 17-point agreement. Even though this agreement was forced on us, but it was violated, right? So which forced Dalai Lama and 80,000 Tibetans to flee to exile. Now, since then, they always pass a unity law. Now, unity and autonomy, whenever it comes in conflict, unity prevails. So similarly, in Hong Kong, security law is same. The security and autonomy, when it comes to conflict, security will prevail. So human rights, the freedom of speech, right to protest, all this will be secondary to the security law and security of China and Hong Kong. So hence, the dilution of one country, two system in Hong Kong is nothing surprising because it happened in Tibet before. So we are very concerned, and I've said recently that Hong Kong is becoming this a second Tibet. What happened in Tibet and what is happening in Tibet will surely happen in Hong Kong. So all those promises made by the Chinese government to the Tibetan people were betrayed. Similarly, that's happening in Hong Kong. So yes, there are 300,000, Hong Kongese who have Canadian residency or citizenship. Whether they be allowed to return to Canada should be positively considered. Like the government of United Kingdom.
Mr. Bergeron.
On the basis of your assessment of the situation in Hong Kong, how can you, with any hope, apply any type of agreement with the government of the People's Republic of China? What type of international pressure would have to be brought to bear on the People's Republic of China to be able to draw up a new agreement with Tibet? Would it be possible? Would it be credible? Would it be able to pass the necessary test of time?
Every small gesture or major initiative will matter. Passing a motion in the Canadian Parliament saying that the one country, two system of Hong Kong should prevail, violation should be condemned, and moving to the UN Human Rights Council, passing a resolution on Hong Kong, and having a coordinated approach with other countries to do similar things in the parliament, and passing, acts in the different governments and executive orders that in the one country, two system of Hong Kong should be upheld. All this should be, recorded so that there's a reference. When it happened to Tibet in 1950s, Many countries felt the same. They did not, support us at the United Nations. Of course, we passed 3 resolutions. Thereafter, they did not. And the Canadians and all of the governments, essentially, they did not put anything on the record. So more noise you can make, more resolutions you can pass, more hearings you can have, more opinion piece you can publish in newspapers will be very helpful. Eventually, democracy is inevitable. We must push China to embrace democracy, and human rights should be guaranteed. So eventually it will all happen. But for that to happen, coordinated approach and bilateral approach to press on Chinese government is very, very important.
Mr. Bergeron, il vous reste seulement...
You have 15 seconds left, Mr. Bergeron. Yeah, well, 15 seconds, I think that would be unreasonable to continue my exchange. It would be a lack of respect on my part. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Sangay, for joining us at this late hour where you are. It's a pleasure to meet you in this way. I was very interested in your idea of a solution involving dialogue between your organization or the Tibetan people and the government of China, based on, and it seems to me, you're looking at the 17-point agreement not necessarily as a blueprint, but as at least a model that was attempted and agreed upon by both sides. But it involved the autonomy for Tibet, but it also stipulated that the Tibetans recognized Chinese sovereignty over Tibet, etc. So that is the model, which, as you talked about, one country, 2 systems. That is the kind of thing that's been in Hong Kong since 1997. So that idea that you call the middle way seems as a direction towards a solution. Is there any support for that outside? You're suggesting Canada should perhaps adopt that formally or support that. Is there support for that from other countries at the moment, or is that something that you're working on as part of your ongoing interactions internationally?
Yes, thank you very much, Honorable Harris. Yes, when President Obama met with His Holiness Dalai Lama in 2014 and 16, both times White House, issued a press statement supporting middle way approach of the Tibetan people. Not only they supported, they applauded the middle way approach. And in the European Parliament also, many of the members have, moved motion. And several countries, 17 or 18 countries, parliaments. So parliamentarians have issued statements in various parliaments as well. In fact, at the Canadian Senate, there is a motion to support middle way approach. So middle way approach is essentially to say that the Chinese government should end repression of the Tibetan people and guarantee genuine autonomy of the Tibetan people within the framework of the Chinese constitution. Then, separation of Tibet will not be sought. So that is what we are seeking. So yes, any kind of motion, statement will help. Otherwise, what the Chinese officials are doing in Tibet is they are violating all kinds of human rights, but they act with impunity because no one says anything. So unless you come to support the people in East Turkestan or Xinjiang or Hong Kong and Taiwan and Tibet, they act with impunity and they think they can get away with it. So now there is reassessment of China policy all over the world, including in Canada. So yes, one must be assertive, as far as your principles and values are concerned.
Can I ask you another question, which arises from some of the background information we were giving, because it talks about ethnic Tibetans outside of the Tibetan Autonomous Region, which the government of China recognizes, but there are Tibetans in a number of other provinces as well. And how do they fit into your narrative and your proposed solution of the middle way?
Yes, I think they are Tibetans because, the traditional definition of Tibet is Yuzhang, Kham, and Amdo. These are the three traditional provinces of Tibet. Now, for example, Amdo is mainly Qinghai and Gansu provinces of China. And that's where His Holiness Dalai Lama was born, which is outside of Tibet Autonomous Region. So my father comes from, Kham, which is now presently in Sichuan province. So to say that Tibet is only Tibet Autonomous Region is to say Dalai Lama is not Tibetan, or my father was not a Tibetan, right? So we all are Tibetans. So what we seek is, in the genuine autonomy, administrative authority over Tibetan people, because they have same language, same culture, same spirituality, and same even terrain and territory. It's all mountainous region. So hence, to have one administrative structure is more efficient and capable. So yes, Chinese government sometimes say, oh, what Tibetans are asking is 1/4 of China. This is unreasonable. Dalai Lama is unreasonable. No, we are not unreasonable, because historically that's where Tibetans lived, and that's where Tibetans are living now. So Dalai Lama is a Tibetan. My father, late father, also is a Tibetan. So that's the Tibetan plateau.
So there's both then the human rights issue, which has to do with the suppression of the culture and the religion, but also this issue of autonomy as it relates to Tibetans in the Tibetan Autonomous Region, but also elsewhere. So that
definitely
that provides some complications, I should think, should it?
No, the human rights situation of Tibetans in whole of the Tibetan plateau is same. The economic marginalization is similar, environmental destruction is similar, even though Chinese government says Tibet Autonomous Region and then other areas of Tibetan area, adjacent areas are all Tibetan Autonomous Prefectures and Tibetan Autonomous Counties. So Chinese government also called them Tibetan Autonomous Areas. So essentially, Chinese government recognized them as same Tibetan area. It's just that they have carved them and put in, different Chinese provinces.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris.
That's not an impediment, I guess. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. And now we go on to the second round. Ms. Oleslev, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you so very much for being here, especially since it is so late. And my apologies that I don't have any phrases in Tibetan, but I will say in English how important it is and how much we support you and Tibet in the cause. Because as you said, Tibet is the first casualty, and that none of us are immune. And so we need to provide that support not only to Tibet, but to ensure that we don't lose our freedoms in the same course as well. I wanted to ask you, on the 19th of December, the Americans passed the Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act that required Department of State to deny visas for Chinese officials involved in restricting access to Tibet for U.S. officials and journalists, etc. I wondered if you could speak to that a bit and give us an idea of whether or not, from your perspective, it has achieved the objective that it was meant to achieve, and if it is an effective tool and something that that we perhaps should be considering.
Thank you for that question. Yes, Tibet, was the first case, and when Tibet was occupied and human rights violations took place, many people, many leaders thought they could keep quiet in Tibet and they can make deals with the Chinese government. Later, they realized that what happened in Tibet is now happening in Xinjiang with all this million detention. The party secretary of Tibet Autonomous Region was sent to Xinjiang to implement what he did in Tibet. So the architect of situation in Tibet and Xinjiang, is the same. Similarly, yes, Reciprocal Access to Tibet Act was passed by the Congress, which essentially says that for scholars, journalists, or diplomats, a lot of tourists even come from China to America and from Tibet, but Chinese embassies and consulates don't give visas for Canadian researchers, Canadian students, even Canadian tourists, Canadian diplomats to go to Tibet. So this Reciprocal Access Act simply says, look, if you want to come to Canada, we welcome you, but you must give similar access to Canadians who go to Tibet, right? If you don't do that, this is a basic violation of human rights. And if there are Chinese officials who violate human rights, who torture Tibetans, they act with impunity, they think they can get away with it because no one will talk about it, then the American government is saying, we will deny you visa to come to America, right? So they have named some officials of, East Turkestan who violated human rights, of Uyghur people. Similarly, that's what we are saying, that similar things should happen. For example, 2018 was a year of tourism between Canada and China. How many Chinese came to Canada? But how many Tibetans came from Tibet to Canada? Almost zero, because even 1% of Tibetans in Tibet are not allowed to have passports. Even those few thousand who had passport, who came to India for pilgrimages, when they returned to Tibet, their passports were confiscated, right? So one Tibetan blogger wrote, for Tibetans, they have a better chance of going to heaven than get a passport from the Chinese government. So Reciprocal Access Act simply says, yes, Canadians should be allowed to go to Tibet, right? Similarly, Tibetans should be allowed to come to Canada, and researchers especially. Now, the Freedom House says, the Syria is the least free region in the whole world, and second least free region in the whole world is Tibet. Now, how many people know about it? Not many, because journalists are not allowed to go to Tibet to investigate the situation. That's why 50 independent experts, UN experts, from 30 UN special procedure mandate holders have written to the Chinese government, allow them to go to Hong Kong, give them access to Tibet. They want to do research, but Chinese government says no. Even visas are used to blackmail, scholars to write their research papers favorable to the Chinese government and unfavorable to the Canadian government in Tibet.
So from your perspective, it is the beginning of an effective tool.
Yes, definitely. It's a deterrence, So when a Chinese official, is about to violate or torture a Tibetans or Uyghurs or the Hong Kongese, then they will think twice and say, hey, if my son or daughter has to study in Canada or America, I better not torture because my visa could be denied, right? Or a Chinese, a Canadian journalist will come and investigate this issue and report about it, So otherwise, they're acting with impunity. So this is a small deterrence, but nonetheless a necessary one.
Thank you very much, Ms. Alislev and Dr. Sangay. And now, Mr. Fajakatas, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Sangay, for being here and your advocacy on behalf of so many. It's an honor to engage with you this afternoon. I do have a question relating to the specifics of President Xi. Is the Tibetan experience markedly different under Mr. Xi than it has been under previous Chinese leaders? Certainly, the Tibetan experience is one of enormous difficulty. Human rights suppression has defined what the Tibetan people have faced in the Tibetan Autonomous Region for decades. We acknowledge that, and that is extremely clear. But have things taken a decidedly different path under President Xi, or is it simply a continuation of previous Chinese policy? Could you comment on that?
Yes, I think the situation of Tibetans, have been bad. So, so it could get, more bad, But under Xi Jinping, in the last 10 years or so, it has gone from bad to worse. The repression is so severe. The technological control, the manual control of the Tibetan people, movements are restricted. So that way, I think the human rights violation is very, very severe. Before, Tibetans in Tibet could listen to, illegally though, listen to news from outside. But nowadays, it's all shut down. Tibetans to travel outside of Tibet, as I said, not allowed. Tibetans to move from one place to another is not allowed. So, the social credit system, which is implemented in China, where everything is photographed, everything is, reduced to algorithm. Now, in Tibet, if your social credit system is low, you go to jail. In China, you are denied a plane ticket or train ticket, but in Tibet, you go to jail. So yes, situation in Tibet has gone from bad to worse in the last decade or so.
Thank you very much. I do want to ask you another question, and it offers you an opportunity to clarify. There are those in China, particularly within the Chinese leadership, that will say that if you look at the economic aid that has been contributed to the Tibetan Autonomous Region, excuse me, the investment is equivalent to about $100 billion since the annexation of Tibet in 1951. Chinese subsidies have funded substantial transportation and hydropower projects that have resulted in a local economic growth rate over the past 2 decades that exceeds the national average. I'm reading a briefing note prepared to us by the extraordinary analysts that we have from the Library of Parliament. This is not their view. This is a view that, as I said before, some in the Chinese state put forward. What would you say to that? Because it is something that is brought up by the Chinese leadership. And what would you say also, because I'll run out of time and I won't get a chance to ask the third question, so I'll put it here, to concerns that have been expressed by China about secessionist tendencies within the Tibetan movement. Do you have a response to both of those? Again, I am very sympathetic to Tibetan calls for greater human rights, certainly, but I think this offers an opportunity for you to clarify here to the committee and to Canadians watching on these 2 points.
Yes. If Chinese government is so confident in what they're saying, they have given more subsidies, economic development benefits to Tibetan people, then let's have referendum, Let Tibetans in Tibet choose a Tibetan leader and Chinese leader. Let them vote. I'm absolutely certain, hands down, Tibetans in Tibet will vote for a Tibetan leader, right? Because, you can now, if you want to go into details, subsidies, where are they going? So many Chinese migrants are moving to Tibet, right? 90% of businesses and enterprises in Lhasa, the capital city of Tibet, are controlled by Chinese people. So all the hydropower you are mentioning are owned or run by Chinese companies and Chinese officials. And how are Tibetans benefiting? All the minerals extracted from Tibet are benefiting Chinese officials, not Tibetan people. So, even Panchen Lama, who we were talking about, 10 Panchen Lama, who was the vice chairman of National People's Congress, said, few days before he died, he said, Chinese government has benefited more after the occupation of Tibet than the Tibetan people. So all these promises that they say the Tibetan people have benefited are proven wrong as per the statement of Panchen Lama, who was the vice chairman of the National People's Congress. So clearly, they talk about all these things, subsidies and all, but most of them goes to the Chinese migrants who moved to Tibet to own businesses.
Doctor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Williamson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Dr. Sage. I want to thank you very, very much for being here today. I have to say you have a very impressive resume, your work in Asia, as well as your studies in the United States and elsewhere, and of course your election as well. I want to go back to something that you had mentioned earlier about China's growing role in the United Nations, and you had touched on its infiltration of certain very key spots. One, of course, is its ability now to oversee some of the reporters and investigating on the human rights file. How do you think this is going to impact Tibet and the hearing that Tibet has received both at the United Nations and in publications around the world?
Yes, if you investigate United Nations and different agencies of the United Nations, you will see a lot of Chinese personnel in key positions. So if, let's say, Tibetans want to move a resolution at the Human Rights Council, extremely difficult. If you want to register a Tibetan NGO at the United Nations, not allowed. And then, I've been to country after country. For example, Australia, when I first visited, the talk was whether then Foreign Minister of Australia will meet with me or not. Next time when I went there, he has become a consultant for the Chinese government. And when I went to Norway, the key person, who discouraged meeting between Dalai Lama and the Norwegian leadership was then Foreign Minister of Norway, right?
Yeah.
Next time when I found out that he has become the president of World Economic Forum, right? How did he get there, right? So, you go, so I've been to so many countries, ministers after ministers are, either brainwashed or pressured or co-opted by the Chinese government. So, why, even the coronavirus pandemic, why the WHO president, was in China shaking hands with Xi Jinping when, the reports were delayed. And according to one report, that 95% of the pandemic could have been prevented had the Chinese government informed the international community 3 weeks prior to, ahead of what the Chinese government did later. So they are master in co-opting leadership at every level. So I think there is, if you check YouTube, there is a song, a group of children wearing traditional dresses singing a song in praise of One Belt, One Road initiative. Now you realize that this is a youth leadership forum of, I think, UNICEF, right? And the song that they sing was a rip-off of, Coca-Cola advertisement of 1980s, So how can you have a youth leadership training by an UN agency singing a song in praise of One Belt, One Road initiative of the Chinese government, Mainly because there was a key Chinese official who was in charge of the leadership training, So Chinese influence is everywhere.
Yeah. Well, and we see that elite capture here, and I know there's pressure afoot to have government officials who have worked on the China file to have a cooling off period, so they cannot immediately go to work for the Chinese regime once they leave government service, whether they are politicians or public servants. Could you talk to me a little bit about, I think I have a minute, the chair's doing, I have about a minute. Could you actually talk to me a little bit about what is life like on the ground in Tibet in terms of Tibetans getting news, transmitting that news? I know there's a problem all over China where the state controls news outlets, but your people are folks that are looking for information and to get the word out. Do they get that information in Tibet? Can they share it, or does the state really close things off there as well?
In about 20 seconds, please.
Very difficult. If there's a small protest in one village or a town, the whole internet is shut down.
Yeah.
So very repressive technological control. Having said that, mouth to mouth, right? So when relatives talk to each other, you have to talk in code language. So that's how you pass information. Otherwise, technologically and manually, Tibetan plateau and Tibetan people is repressed and absolutely controlled.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Williamson. And now Ms. Zan, 5 minutes. Please unmute your mic. Ms. Zan. I'm not hearing Ms. Zan. So what I think I'll do, if members haven't got a problem with this, I'm going to go on for the moment to Mr. Bergeron, and then I'll return to Ms. Zan. Maybe she's having a technical problem. I'll give her the opportunity if she reappears. Alors, second, I'll switch to French, excuse me. Alors, Ms.
So, Mr. Bergeron, you have 2.5 minutes. I don't think that he's here either. Oh, here he is. So thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, we always have this same problem, muting, unmuting, that doesn't work. That being said, I don't want to tell Mr. Sangha of all our technical problems, but I've been listening to Mr. Sangha's answers to the different questions that are being asked to him. Notably his answers regarding Hong Kong. And it seems to me that there is not much hope. And so I would like to go back to the question that I had asked previously. How can we maintain hope that we can reach an agreement that will be satisfactory for Tibetan and Chinese authorities?
Always remain hopeful. Things change all the time, right? Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years and 8 years in solitary confinement, but he was released and he is restored, democracy in South Africa. Northern Ireland, people of same faith were killing each other for so long, but Good Friday Agreement was signed. Berlin Wall came down and Soviet Union collapsed. So there are so many examples around the world that things do change. We must keep at it. So we must keep speaking. In every hearing, every motion, every statement counts. So, Tibet was the first, and it was neglected by the whole world. And the price that we are paying in Hong Kong, everywhere, including in Canada, is because you refuse to speak once, and that's the price you are paying. So silence is complicit. So, we lost our country. Our Tibetan people are repressed, but we are still hopeful because our civilization based on Buddhism, which is 2,500 years old, and Communist Party and communism is 100 years old only. So comparatively, we are very mature and old and, senior to Communist Party of China. So communism has come and will be gone, and Buddhism and Tibetan civilization will prevail, and Tibetan plateau will prevail, and democracy and human rights of people in Hong Kong will be restored. So we must keep at it, So that's why I'm here after midnight, because this is a struggle. That's why the term struggle is very important. It's a struggle. Every minute, every day is a struggle. But one should always remain hopeful and, keep moving forward. We will get there. Truth always prevails.
Merci de vos paroles sages, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bergeron. Now I'll transfer to English.
We'll go to Ms. Zan, who I now see on the screen. And I don't, but hopefully she's there. Ms. Zan, there you go. Ms. Zan for 5 minutes, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Please go ahead. We can hear you, yes. I think she's having difficulty with her connection because I see that her face, her image is frozen.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Can you hear us? Can you go ahead with your question, please? I think we'll have to, I'm afraid we'll have to carry on. Sorry, Ms. Zan's having a problem.
Actually, I think I'm here now.
Please go ahead with your question.
I'm so sorry, but my internet keeps cutting out. Just want to say hello, and Skiyong, it's so nice to meet you virtually. Here, I'm calling today from Nova Scotia on the East Coast, and we have a large Buddhist community here in my riding in Truro area, and also in Halifax. We have approximately 2,200 Buddhists and 3 centers. So many people are concerned about what's happening with Tibet. And I know many people would be very pleased to hear you today and say that we will do our best to try and support your issues and the problems that are going on with China. I'd like to ask you, what is happening with regards to the healthcare, with regards to the pandemic in Tibet? We're not hearing too much about that. So how are people being looked after, and what is going on?
It's so good to see you virtually. I do come to Halifax Security Forum every year, so I hope to come even this November and meet the Buddhist community as well,
Excellent. I will come and meet you.
Sure. When we have this, muting and unmuting problem, technological problem, we all should know it's all because of coronavirus, which originated in China, right? So, so if there's something called karma, something should happen pretty soon in a good way. That is the resolution of the Tibetan people. Now, after the coronavirus and spread all over China, it's odd that, if you look at the trajectory or the trend around the world, it doesn't restrict to one place. But in China, it restricted to mainly in Wuhan and the extended province, right? It did not spread all over China. So, there is a growing suspicion that the information was suppressed. So it infected more people. And that's why, when Chinese people started, traveling outside, then from Europe to America and Canada, and it started infecting more people. Now, as far as Tibet is concerned, it's very interesting. So as per the Chinese report, 101 Tibetans were infected, all cured, no one died. Now, we know for a fact that from one county, we know at least more than a dozen people were infected and several Tibetans died, just from one county. But after March 18th, nothing, no information came from inside Tibet. Everything was shut down. So they took advantage of the pandemic and they have resorted to more repressive policies in the Tibetan plateau. So you know that 154 Tibetans have committed self-immolation since 2009, right? So which means the situation in Tibet is so desperate that Tibetan people are resorting to self-immolation. Now, even cases of, sometimes we get cases of self-immolation, but we never get the details because it's repressed. Is absolutely controlled. So even coronavirus and health issue, extremely difficult to know. Since March 18, we have no information whatsoever. So that means Tibetan plateau is completely shut down as far as health-related or coronavirus-related information is concerned.
Thank you. I wanted to also ask you about the Indian-Chinese skirmishes along the border. I know that in May and June, there were these deadly skirmishes. And so what is CAT's view of these skirmishes and what impact did these have on China's military presence in Tibet?
Yes, in the Indo-Tibet border, right? So we say Indo-Tibet border now, the Chinese government says Indo-China border. So it's like 3,500 kilometers long border. So not even 1 kilometer of land border was there between India and China. So Tibet acted as the buffer zone between India and China. Hence, there was relative peace because they never met face to face. So since the occupation of Tibet, the Chinese army has moved to the border now. It's called LAC, Line of Actual Control. The agreement was that there will be no violence or no gunfighting. So all the guns, even for army personnel, the gun has to be pointed down. But this time, the Chinese side used violence and killed, 20 Indian soldiers and injured, more than 100, right, using batons and all kinds of weapons. So for the first time in 40 years, there was violence and there were deaths. So it has created a lot of anxiety and element of resentment, even in India. So I've appeared in 40-some television shows of India and reminded them it was always Indo-Tibet border.
Doctor, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but
sure.
Thank you, Ms. Zan. That's the end of your time. And I would ask members, maybe I don't think I did that, but I don't think we should be using the symbols about the clapping and the thumbs up and so forth. We can express, when that's our term, of course, sorry, but so that may have been up by mistake in your case, Ms. Zan, because you had problems obviously with the technical. Okay, it's appearing on the screen. I'm not sure what. Oh, I think it's my fault. Pardon me. It's entirely my fault. It's my mistake. And now I'm on to Mr. Harris for 2.5 minutes. I apologize.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, Dr. Sangye, let me just say that I wish to acknowledging everywhere. I know it's a long and uncertain road, but you have offered very great hope, and I think that's a very positive thing. I'd like to understand a little better what your organization and how that has evolved since the Dalai Lama and the leadership of your organization has gone in not a different direction, but has separated out in terms of authority. What was the purpose for that, and how has that been effective in advancing the cause of Tibetan people?
Yeah, Central Tibet Administration, which my administration is called. The head of the administration was always His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and in 2011 he separated the church, the state, and devolved all his political authority. And in 2011, I took over as the political leader. And then our administration functions like any other government. So we have an education department, which runs about, 70 or so, and nearly 70, 80 some schools. And the Department of Religion and Culture oversees about, 250 monasteries and nunneries. And our own health system, our own settlements have a mayor-like system. So we run like any other government. This building where I am is the Information and International Relations building. We have 13 offices like embassies all over the world. And then, I'm grateful to the Canadian government for providing funding for, education of Tibetan children in South Asia. So, we educate our own children. So this is a self-sustaining, quite efficiently run administration. So if you compare to any refugee community anywhere in the world, you will find the most efficient one is the Central Tibetan administration. So we provide education up to high school and provide scholarship to children to go to colleges. And we provide, welfare to people who are poor, who are sick. We have old age homes and monasteries and nunneries, preserve and promote our spirituality and our culture and language. So, and our finance department runs, financial services, including like bank-like system. Yes, so we run like any other government. So we provide a very good service to the Tibetan people. For example, our literacy rate is 94%.
Doctor, I apologize for interrupting again. I'm afraid we're over Mr. Harris's time, and I thank Mr. Harris. Now, we started a bit later than planned. I hope I had in mind that we would go as a result of that to about 4:45, if that's acceptable. I mean, I'm trying to manage that we have the sort of equal amounts for each of the two witnesses and balance the time of, and this would, I think, allow for one more set 5 minutes for the Conservatives and one for the Liberals. I hope that will be acceptable to members. And then we'll go on to we'll have to